hit record right now. Dr. Gianrico Farrugia, CEO of the Mayo Clinic. Welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me here for the discussion, Bruce.
And we're super eager to dive right into it. It was terrific catching up with you in advance of this last week, but let's start where anybody paying any attention to healthcare these days undoubtedly has to start, which is of course the global COVID pandemic. And something we didn't talk about, but I was interested in is when did you realize, when did the team and the leadership at the Mayo Clinic realize this was not a typical flu season, this was not a near miss like SARS or MERS, that this was going to be of the scale and scope that it was?
Well, it seems a long time ago now, but I think I'll get my dates straight. We started getting some sense that something was going on in mid-January, but I happened to be, like probably others on this call, at the World Economic Forum. I think it was between the 20th and 24th of January. And it really was in that forum where you began to sense that this quiet that was growing from day to day. And then as you got to start talking to some of the journalists were asking us questions. And then I was talking to my colleague friends and talked about how the supply chain was already being disrupted. In that, at first it was what can leave, but then it became apparent it was going to be bigger than that. Really, it went home knowing it was going to be something out of the ordinary. And then after the first announcement, I think in the Philippines, of the first patient outside of China, it became apparent that it was going to be a public health emergency.
And
now,
so,
oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to ask, so what do? You get back, you have a premonition, a sense, you get early confirmation. What do you gather the team, and what does one do in the early innings?
Oh, not immediately. We're still trying to figure it out. Look, so, but we have a playbook. Mayo has been around for 150 plus years. We've dealt with other pandemics, so we had a pandemic playbook. We have very deep relationships with our suppliers. They're more than vendor-vendee. And so we came together and started talking about, okay, what is different about this? What can we do? Let's make sure that we're doing the right thing, and started doing all the scenario planning that we had done before, just getting ready, and now we're putting it into action. Every CEO experiences a significant event in their tenure, right? It's an economic crisis, a national event. Mine, I think Bill George is really right. It's your crucible. And mine came early, came in the form of a pandemic, and hopefully that was it. Well, but we'll see. I'll tell you that as things evolved, we ended up looking after 65,000, 70,000 patients. We had the lowest mortality in the world at Mayo Clinic, but we still saw that heartache and loss. We're still dealing with mental and physical exhaustion, so it's still there. But I think we did fulfill our mission. We lived up to our values. It brought us closer together. And that overall, we're emerging a much more agile organization. And that is something that I can hear others also saying. Now we got to use that agility for good.
Well, I definitely want to get to some of the learnings and where we're going. I'm interested. You had a pandemic playbook. Did you find how well suited to 2020 and 2021 did it prove to be?
Well, I don't know where we'll go. We'll go wherever our conversation goes. But I will make the point that it is essential that as an organization, but then as a country and as a world, we never plan for a particular pandemic, right? The worst mistake we could do now is to plan for the next COVID pandemic. You have to plan for something bigger than that, and you have to have the agility to move. So we actually found our playbook to be quite useful because it wasn't specific. It was, this is what we are going to be doing. This is how we judge how safe we can be. This is how we develop our testing. And it is at that level that we all found it particularly useful. At the same time, of course, the important thing about planning is that you plan, it's not the plan itself. And like every other organization, we had to adapt and make a lot of changes. But no, I'll go back and say it was a very useful thing to have.
So what do you think you learned? As undoubtedly the organization, as every great organization does, and Mayo Clinic is very much a great organization. You revisit your assumptions, you update the playbook with new learnings and new possibilities. What do you feel like you learned as an organization, and then perhaps how much of that is applicable to the broader health system or even society?
Well, this is a fundamental one, and I'm glad you asked it. I think both healthcare overall and certainly Mayo Clinic specifically, we've discovered that we can change healthcare. We can change it for the better in very meaningful ways. And importantly, and I'll underline it, we found we can change at a faster rate than we ourselves thought possible. In other words, we were holding ourselves back. You'd expect a crisis to make us become more internally focused. And the opposite happened. We have a strategy. It's to cure more patients, to connect people and data, to create new scalable knowledge, and to transform healthcare through our Mayo Clinic platform. We found it was the right strategy. But what the pandemic taught us, and we have to keep reminding ourselves, that we underestimated the ability of healthcare to transform itself, and importantly, to tolerate change. So I'll give you examples, right? So we went, and we weren't the only ones, we went to making 90% of our appointments virtual. We moved our workforce to work at home. We created new research on COVID-19. We ended up with over 1,000 publications, 250 clinical studies. We had to create 400 new care plans within our electronic health record. We rotated staff wherever COVID was surging. For us, that included Abu Dhabi. We created 400 education courses for hybrid learning. And at the same time, we committed $100 million to eradicate racism and increase health equity. And we found we could do it safely and effectively. Our patients could benefit from this. And so I really think it's very important for Mayo Clinic and for others to remember this, because we have this opportunity now to not internalize that knowledge, but now make it available and actually do transform healthcare for the benefit of all.
How much of that, though, requires the existential threat? I mean, you're right. And having read and learned a bunch about what Mayo Clinic did and how you led, it was extraordinary that healthcare can be that transformational and can move that rapidly. But some of that is because we're in the middle of the biggest global pandemic in a century. How do you maintain the incentive, the desire, the push to keep challenging yourself and to keep transforming when you don't have an existential threat?
This is a question that you can answer many different ways. And of course, there's past history which would argue very much in favor of what you just said. I do believe, as CEO of Mayo Clinic, is that healthcare itself has always wanted to change, but we always felt we lacked the confidence, we lacked the playbook to show you can do it in a way that makes sense. And we have that now. So I think that there are enough people that want this to happen. And of course, we know it has to happen. We know what our current healthcare system is like. That are really our job now, my job as CEO is, and I refer to healthcare being like a stiff rubber band. You may have heard me say that. It snaps back if you let go. So you now realize why it's so hard to transform healthcare. It takes a lot of effort to stretch it, but once you transform, it's very hard to stay there. And so what we now need to do is actually create barriers to prevent us from going back to what we did before COVID. And I've been very deliberate about saying, given that the margin of error in healthcare is so small, that the margins are so small, that unless you create rigid benchmarks about where we need to be for digital, for virtual care, then we will slowly drift back. And what I'm seeing happening is that with those barriers in place, we then can create the proper regulatory and payer structure for the future of healthcare. So yes, past history would tell us it's going to be very difficult. I would argue this is an opportunity that we cannot lose.
And so you began to talk about the types of barriers to be changed and metrics to be adjusted. So how many are regulatory? How many are mindset? What if the patient is open, what's the surgery you're going to perform to cause the changes to stick?
So as I mentioned, part of it is the mindset. The mindset is very important. Two is it's the right time. It's the right timing is everything. It's the right time. There was a lot of buildup to this. It didn't just happen. Vaccines didn't just happen. There were a decade or more of research in mRNA that then people could grab onto. The same thing has happened in the healthcare sector. There are a lot of these people were thinking about it and how do you get telehealth to work? How do you do remote monitoring to work? How do you get a home hospital to work? The successes now will drive success. So what you mentioned are all true. The mindset, the confidence, the financial incentives, which are really important that the regulatory changes are made permanent. Otherwise, we will slip back. And also the will as a nation to be able to see that we cannot only exist in a place where hospitals and hospital organizations have to be at 98 or 99% of capacity in order to do okay, because that's what then happens if something goes wrong. I believe that a place like Mayo Clinic now has a responsibility to lead. We felt that we were empowered to lead, and now I believe we and others, but I'll speak for Mayo Clinic, feel that we have the tools, we have the desire, and we have the responsibility to lead so that we do transform healthcare, make it stronger, and make change that is lasting. And we're the only ones that can do that.
So does that operationally, does that mean creating a playbook? I mean, obviously leading by example, it's something Mayo Clinic's done for a century. You'll continue to do it. And it sounds like you have new and creative, positive disruption ideas, but how to get the rest of the country and the world to follow?
Oh, my way of looking at this is, and we can perhaps talk a little more about Mayo specific plans if you want to, but in general, so I firmly believe it's the responsibility of healthcare to transform itself, and that any other attempt at transforming it from the outside on its own will fail unless healthcare providers are involved. Now, that comes across as hubris. I actually think it's the opposite. We have to accept the burden that we at Mayo Clinic and other healthcare organizations have a responsibility to transform from within, which means we have to be much more open to change, but also that we must lead change rather than being passive participants. Now, that is different from saying we should transform in isolation. What it means is that partnership is critical. You have to find the right partners. In Mayo Clinic's case, we have a partnership with Google to drive AI to data. We have a partnership with Inference to identify new therapies, a partnership with Medically Home to implement our home hospital platform. We're scaling with Kaiser. But together with that, I'm also finding that one thing that happened to us during COVID is that we've become much closer to other healthcare organizations. So I'll tell you, I'm much closer to Tom Mihalovich, the CEO of Cleveland Clinic, to Mark Harrison, the CEO of Intermountain Health, to Greg Adams, the CEO of Kaiser Permanente. We're doing things together we would not have done pre-pandemic. So I think it's a bigger than a Mayo Clinic playbook. We certainly have our own playbook, but it is this realization that the right partnerships done in the right way will work as long as healthcare has taken on itself that responsibility to lead.
That's encouraging. I don't get a lot of encouragement around healthcare these days. I'm interested. I've read a lot about, particularly in the height of the pandemic here in the United States, doctors and nurses, especially in ERs, almost nearing PTSD, just being overwhelmed. How do you rate the kind of state of mind of the individuals of the healers who work there? And is it back? Was it ever as frayed, or is the Mayo Clinic built a culture where it was sturdier?
So clearly, this is something we have to give a lot of attention to. I think it'd be a false sense to say anything other than the fact there's a lot of work ahead. It is forcing us to do things that we were doing before. So before we focused a lot on burnout. Burnout is real, as you know, data suggesting that a significant percentage of healthcare providers are burnt out. When we came together for the pandemic, people came together, there was purpose, and the purpose created a sense of camaraderie. but it also created all the stressors that we are now seeing. So I think it's time to move from burnout to wellness and to resiliency. And so I am of the opinion that our next push is towards resiliency in healthcare, where you have to actually provide the tools as an organization, and individuals working in healthcare have the responsibility to use them to build up a more resilient mindset, because healthcare is going to remain stressful. And yes, we have to take away a lot of the irritations that make people more likely to be burnt out, but we also have to build resiliency. And that is what we are doing at the moment, is we're investing heavily in resiliency as a way forward, while of course making sure that we create warm lines and other things to make sure people have access to the help that they need. I suspect that this will continue to actually grow for a while as people come out of the pandemic and go back into their daily lives, and the little irritants that were less irritating because there was such a big crisis now come back in. So it's not going to go away, and we've got to make sure we embrace every way we can to make sure that our providers and physicians are able to have the tools they need to then be better conveyors of healthcare than they would if they were to be burnt out or in fact are dealing with mental health issues.
So the way you talk and the way you think suggests to me you're exactly the perfect guy to be running the Mayo Clinic or a large organization like that. So congratulations, Michael Powell and the rest of the board. That was a good call. Is this, when you were a boy, did you think I want to run a premier global health network or even be a doctor? Like, what was your path?
So I grew up in the island of Malta. In school, we had to learn one thing about every state in the United States. Mayo Clinic is headquartered in Minnesota. I did not know that, but I knew that the one thing I had to learn about Minnesota is corn. So that's what I knew. I was lucky enough to get to know somebody who had worked at Mayo and had come to Malta. I got to know them, applied for residency, got into residency, and have had a wonderful career. So no, leadership to me was not something I knew I was interested in doing. I was lucky enough to come to Mayo Clinic and create a research career together with my clinical career. And then I always think that you first have to embrace an organization before you change it. You try and change it too early, you're going to be rebuffed. If you wait too long, you're going to lose that urge. And so what happened to me is I got to complain about a few things. I thought I could do them better. People knew better than that. So they put me in committees, and then the rest is history.
Yeah, it's always the best way to deal with complaining people is to put them in charge, for sure. So speaking of people in charge, something I ask everyone who's nice enough to join us is, if you had an opportunity to speak with the President of the United States, the President Biden, what's the advice you'd give him on dealing with both the pandemic, but even things more broadly?
Well, let me start by saying that as somebody who very often is approached by other people to give me advice, I'd be hesitant to give somebody who's probably getting lots of advice from a lot of people all the time. I would say at first I'd be very aware of the fact we have to recognize this truly was a pandemic unlike others that we've seen in our lifetime. So the challenges are significant. The science had to rapidly evolve. So I don't think there's anybody on this call who would disagree with me when I would say it's trust the science to make the right decisions, and that's for sure. I've gone on record as saying that in a pandemic, we have to work out very quickly what works and what doesn't. And I've published an op-ed on this with actually Tom Halavich at Cleveland Clinic, which is that we need those very rigorous phase 3 trials, the vaccine trials, that tells us this absolutely works. But at the same time, we also need a coalition of people coming together to create the environment where the very busy emergency department physician, without having to spend a lot of time enrolling a patient, can also be part of testing new therapies. That requires a coalition that's different from rigorous phase 3s. And therefore, I would humbly suggest that we do that. And in fact, we've been helping out with that coalition. And been a lot of former FDA commissioners who've joined in that, as well as other organizations. I'd also say that we have to have another look at our public health. Some of our state public health departments have, by necessity, had to enforce rules, right? That's what they do normally. And so it's quite a pivot when you have to go to a pandemic. So being able to create that infrastructure to be able to do both is really important. And then I'd encourage the presidents to build on the innovation and momentum that we see coming out of the pandemic. I think it's really important to understand for the United States, we have the highest of the high. I mentioned what Mayo Clinic does, our lowest mortality, but also we have quite a few lows. We have to resist the temptation that the way forward is to compress towards the middle. We've got to have strategies to build up and pull the bottom up, while at the same time making sure that there is innovation that can happen and lead at the top. And so what we want to do, if you look at healthcare as a sine wave, you don't want to compress that sine wave, but you want to move that sine wave up, and at the same time, making the peak and the lower level slightly more closer together. For Mayo Clinic, we strongly feel the way to do that is that moving healthcare towards a platform, moving healthcare away from a pipeline business to a true platform, as has happened in other sectors. And that is what we're spending a lot of time on. And we're finding that we can not only innovate at the top of the pyramid, but we can scale these innovations across the world. And you will see us drive more and more towards the platform concept in healthcare.
We don't even have enough time to dive into that. It's fascinating. The pipeline to platform mindset is fascinating and transformational. I look forward to reading more. My friend Piper Sue and others from your great team will send it to me, I hope. Let me ask you this, though. You'd mentioned that you'd urge leaders to trust the science, and I'm with you. When I think of the biggest challenges in the country right now, I don't think it's COVID. I don't think it's the economy. I don't think it's China. I think it's lack of trust. And I think the inability, whether it's trust in media, trust in politics, and often trust in institutions that don't deserve as much trust as they do. I struggle because what I've seen had this weird duality where people trust their doctor, but they don't trust the doctor on TV who is officially a scientist. And that feels to me that is a huge problem for an innovation-driven nation, let alone in trying to get through what is at core a scientific challenge and medical problem. For maybe a two-part of this question. First, have you found among the patients that they are still trusting their doctors, and how do we then get them to trust the health industry, which they don't trust? They do trust their doctor, they don't trust the sector. Where do we lose it, and how do we fix it?
Well, it's a significant issue. There's no way we can deal with health inequity issues without trust and collaboration. And so trust is more than simply just, it's a problem with a pandemic, it's a problem with other things. It's a significant risk for the United States, and you can go even broader than that. So Mayo, we're very proud to be one of the most trusted leaders in healthcare. We take that responsibility seriously. And it's even more important in the digital age where, as you said, information travels quickly, sometimes faster than facts can catch up. So I'll tell you that from a Mayo Clinic standpoint, we were very careful with every communication, be transparent and be anchored in science. So at times that meant offering information counter to other messages. Sometimes it was waiting a while because we had to get the science before we spoke, and making sure that our communities, our patients were hearing the same message. As a country, I think we have to look ourselves in the mirror and understand that there are we got ourselves to a point over the last 10, 15 years, I'm not even talking about more recently, where it became okay that 2 points of view would have equal merit irrespective of where the facts were coming from. And we have to, as a country, accept that we've got to look and see how we're going to regain that trust. And I believe that trust is going to come from being able to articulate in a very clear way what is it that we're trying to say, and not having to cut off the inconvenient parts, so that we don't have to take a stance that everything is 100% good, that you are able to take a stance that this medication is going to work, but it may only work in a certain group. And at the moment, it's the best we can do, but we're going to have to come back because there are still other things to do. So I'll tell you that for Mayo Clinic, it's what got us through the pandemic. We were able to put out a COVID test within 2 weeks of the pandemic starting, because we had the trust of our own staff that they were able to be empowered to do things. And then our patients trusted us and started coming back very early. And that then enabled us to do the clinical trials and etc. So I don't have an answer for a nation, but I do know that what you've identified is in a digital age, if we're going to transform, we are going to have to take a step back and earn trust by being very careful to not overstate when it comes to healthcare topics, which sometimes means that we have to say things that are a little less pleasant to hear.
Yeah, and I'm sure the analyses and postmortems will look into this. My own unscientific observation is where things go off the rails is when they become media. And when, it's either the expert doctor on TV who's interested in getting invited back to be the expert doctor on TV, or the quasi-partisan media coverage, they're competing for clicks. So they, it is within their economic interest to be a little bit more outrageous, a little bit more salacious. And as you pointed out, science is not exact. Science does its best. It's all about trial and error, and it's all about careful and cautious progress. And that doesn't make for good media. It certainly doesn't make for good TV. But I want to be optimistic, and something that you mentioned earlier is partnerships on artificial intelligence. I know as you think about healthcare transformation, both you individually and the Mayo Clinic are investing a lot in technology and transformational technology. I'd love your thoughts on big data and AI and hopefully a positive future, not the machines get smart and enslave all of us.
So you will hear positivity from me, and you're going to hear that from me, not because as a scientist, I tend to be highly skeptical, but we have evidence. So we've thankfully moved away from the classic early phase, which is you just mentioned, which is AI will make everybody obsolete. We won't need doctors anymore, and we're going to solve every problem. And now we're seeing AI, big data as enabling research, clinical trials, diagnostics, and therapeutics. I've pushed so that Mayo Clinic is not an organization that uses digital tools, but becomes a true digital organization. And a plug for Ursula Burns. You've had her recently on this, and Ursula helps us in that space. Michael Powell did so before. But let me give you a concrete example. So we took our 7 million electrocardiograms, very easy to get, what most of us have had done, and put them into a safe space, analyzed them, developed an algorithm that can detect a variety of heart problems, including heart failure, years before highly invasive tests would have picked up that heart failure. We then took that recently in the last couple of months and applied it to a community and found we could pick up asymptomatic heart failure, which otherwise would have slipped through the cracks. So now we have that information available right in the electronic health record. So with a button that you can press, you can predict heart failure, atrial fibrillation, risk from stroke. It's scalable, and it's come from the correct use of AI, but also that had to be validated not only in a small group, but then in the community. I'll give you another example, and then I'll go wherever you want to go. Currently, across the world, and even in the United States, there is a shortage of infrastructure for radiation for cancer. There are these machines, they can't often be used because it can take up to 15 to 17 hours for a physicist to outline the radiation pathways that are needed to avoid head and essential organs like in head and neck cancer. We've worked with Google and have taken that down to AI, with AI to less than an hour. So you can see now how the same machine can now be used many more times and with a high accuracy to do it. So my message is, let's not ignore the issues, they're real. Let's make sure data privacy is dealt with. In our case, we have a federated approach, sort of a glass wall where our data will never leave Mayo Clinic. You can come in, use it, you can extract the results, the data remain, but also understand that the identification is not enough. You've got to show that you can minimize re-identification. And even after that, you've got to have safeguards so that when something, because of human error, something else happens, you can catch it. So deal with that and then partner deeply, not just superficial partners, partner deeply with groups, in our case, Google, Inference, and others, to be able to solve real world problems. And I firmly believe that we are going to see a significant effect at the level of the doctor's office in the next years, as long as we remain honest and we remain doing things in a careful, systemic way. And I can promise you that's what, as long as I'm in charge at Mayo Clinic, that's what we'll do.
I'm hopeful that the leveraging technology will also lead to leaps, quantum leap improvements in wearables. And I know I more than a decade ago, I got to visit Mayo Clinic in Minnesota and remember meeting some of your wireless radio frequency scientists. It was a gentleman who reminded me of Q from James Bond, the guy, the spy master who was the digital guru. But I'm interested in your thoughts on wearables' role in helping all of us be healthier and, frankly, less time in the hospital because we spot things so much sooner.
So our Mayo Clinic platform has three main components. One is clinical data analytics, another one is virtual care, and the third is remote monitoring and management from devices. The issue with devices at the moment is not that there's not enough data, is that there's data that comes in a variety of formats, and there's a lot of noise associated with the data. And as long as you personally have access to your data, that's great. But when you want to integrate it into your larger healthcare journey, then you've got to, you've really got to do things differently. Our approach has been, to find ways of being extract data from pretty much any device, put it in a safe place where you can then run algorithms in, and then return the data both to the physician, but also to the patient, so that everybody has access to that data. We launched a couple of companies to do that in the last couple of months. What we will have to do is agree on standards. And there's a lot of work being done, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on standards, not only on data, but also on timestamp data. Because we think of data as, in a way, as static from our watch, from our fitness device, but there are a lot of data sources that are non-static and change over time, and we have to be able to deal with those, and that requires a different architecture. So you have to actually build that architecture. In our case, we're building that architecture onto the platform for others to use, not necessarily with us. They can use it on their own. So optimism, but there's going to be a lot of work that needs to happen, and we need to be working together to have standardization happen when it comes to some of these data sources that are currently quite difficult. And a good example at the moment in the United States is what's happening with, it's hard to choose the right word, but COVID credentialing. Why is it that we already have 60 plus COVID credentials that are competing with each other, and it's preventing us then from having the ability to exchange information with the European Union or some other bloc. And so we've got to be careful the same thing doesn't happen with these devices. But I'll stop this with a very positive. We're seeing it happen. We saw it happen with EKG. We're seeing it happen in neurology. We've got great examples of where it can happen. So it's all positive. It's now we've got to bring people together and agree on a way forward.
I hope you said, in terms of use of data, I hope you said neurology and not urology, because I don't want a wearable and urology to mix. It seems like that doesn't work out well. If you were starting your career over right now, or not over, but if you were in college, knowing everything you know, and know you can't go play for the Premier League, let's take soccer off the table, professional soccer's off the table. What would you want to go into medicine? Would you want to go into technology? Where do you think you'd like to be right now if you were starting a career?
I think there's a lot of strength at the moment in combining specialties. So many years ago, it was informatics and biology, and bioinformatics came about, and that was I think at the moment there is a lot of excitement, and I see a lot of excitement in combining some of the more basic science places, immunology as it applies to another disease. And so if I were doing this again, I would much earlier get into the non-biological parts of healthcare to then apply them to healthcare. And I'll tell you that that's a push. I know you didn't mean to ask me the question this way, but I'll tell you that that's a push where we're doing through our education shield, through our medical school, through our graduate school, to make sure that our students that will be the leaders of the future understand that the confluence of these spaces is where true change is going to come from.
Great. I'm going to ask two more questions and then let you get back to saving the world, which is actually literally accurate with respect to Mayo Clinic. One, as the Greg Garcia put it in the chat, and since he was kind enough to help warm up the audience about cybersecurity, we'll ask his question. He says, how do we reconcile and fix the fact that the U.S. spends more on healthcare as a percent of GDP than all other industrialized countries, yet we're not at the top of life expectancy, and we have more chronic disease and obesity? How do we fix that?
So it may be even slightly higher than 16%. It's an issue, but let me start off with just a little tweak here. We should spend as much as we as a country decide it's appropriate for us to spend, right? So let me start, and I think that's really important because it's what we expect to get. Now so I'll start as a start is I don't want us to get an argument, well, the mean across the world is this, we should be striving for the mean. That's number one. But it's also very fair to say, are we getting value, which is the question, from what we're spending? And again, I'll come back to what we need to do is make sure we're innovating for the right spaces, that you are applying the right incentives and opportunities to innovate at the very top of healthcare, at the tip of the pyramid. Mayo Clinic is focused on complex and serious disease, and also innovating at some of the things that were mentioned, obesity, hypertension, stroke. I believe that we do have an opportunity, and it's why we're investing heavily in switching healthcare to a platform, because then others can reverse innovate on our data and other people's data and come up with solutions that we would not have come up on our own. I don't know where we are with times. I don't know if you want me to give a quick example, but if not,
Sure, no, please.
So very quickly, we decided that the time was right to see if we can give hospital-based care at home. So set it up initially with a company called Medically Home. I mentioned Kaiser Permanente is now an equal partner with us. We did this and we showed that with 24/7 physician coverage, with nurses, laundry at home, medication at home, we could look after some really sick people at home. One of our patients happened to have been admitted to our hospital many, many times in the past year. And he told us, wait a bit, when I'm at home, I can press a button and I can speak to a nurse or a physician literally within seconds. Why is it when I'm in your hospital, I sometimes have to wait many, many minutes? And that made us realize that some of the digital technology we are putting into virtual care can come into routine care and hit some of this is what we're talking about. So it's really not, I think we need a mindset shift so that we don't tackle the same problem the same ways, but we tackle these chronic conditions in a way that with modern tools. I am convinced that reason Mayo Clinic is pushing cure, connect, and transform as our strategy is that we can cure chronic disease. And if we can cure chronic disease, then it's been money well spent. There's also a lot of waste in the system. So don't get me wrong. There's a lot of waste we can pull out. So this is not a monolithic answer. The answer is that there are many things we should and can do. I don't want us, however, to be caught in a trap of making sure that we're providing sort of standard of care that without allowing true innovation to happen, because over a period of time, that will hurt us as much as we're currently hurting in the current environment.
That makes sense. That's a great answer. I'm not going to ask Mark Ritchie's question as a question, only to observe that big fans of your book are hoping that maybe a post-COVID chapter expands maybe by one more on think big, start small, move fast, so that it is as current as possible, unless it's already covered. But what I want to ask as the final question we always ask is, we ask our guests for reasons for optimism. And it could be at the individual level, it could be at the national level, it could be at the global level. And the only thing we've ever taken off the table is don't say vaccines, but because we all would want to say vaccines. You can, if you want to, talk about the adaptability of mRNA for other things, but I welcome your thoughts. Why should we all walk away hopeful?
No, let me leave mRNA alone, though I'd love to have another hour to talk about it, and not linear or mRNA, but other uses. You can tell, right, from my voice, you can tell I am optimistic about our future. I'm optimistic about our future because of what we've been able to accomplish together. We've seen creative solutions, we've seen collaboration, hope, adoption of technology at a rapid pace. We say, and others have said it, right, at the 10 years of progress over the course of 1 year. We've formed productive partnerships. We've discovered that we can truly navigate change. And now we are really convinced that we can build on what we've accomplished to truly transform healthcare. So I'm optimistic. I'm also optimistic because we've always attracted idealistic people to healthcare, but I'm seeing a new generation of doctors, nurses, researchers who are coming in that have this drive to not accept status quo, to want to challenge us, to want to say, no, I know you did it this way, but there's got to be a better way. So these two things together give me a lot of hope. Fundamentally, Mayo Clinic is built on hope, right? We're hope and healing. And so it's not surprising I'm hopeful, but I'm also not only hopeful, I'm realistic. I believe I'm realistic in my optimism.
Well, your hope and optimism gives me hope and optimism, and also gratitude. Thank you for your time, your insights, and for the really great and important work that you're doing out there at the Mayo Clinic.
Hey, thank you. And thanks everybody for listening.